Hi everyone, this is Sam with the Wine News in 5. As you can see, a bit of a change of venue today. I'm currently in Australia for my Master of Wine seminar, so here we are. Before I get to global news, I'd like to point out that jancisrobinson.com now has two podcasts. This one, under the Wine News in 5 from jancisrobinson.com, and the jancisrobinson.com podcast, where Richard Hemming has been publishing the story of Jancis's life so far. He's done an incredible job interviewing Jancis, as well as friends and family from different periods of her life, and then editing these interviews together in a way that's humorous, engaging, and honestly pretty restful and relaxing. So I highly recommend you give it a listen. On to the news. Today I'll discuss recent protests in France, as well as government aid for uprooting vineyards, the acquisition of Domaine Sigalas in Greece, Vinarchy considering axing 60 wine brands, an early ice wine harvest in Germany, and the oldest vine in the world. First up, recent protests in France and government aid for uprooting. On November 15th, 4,000 demonstrators, largely wine growers, gathered in the streets of the city of Béziers in the Hérault department of southern France. Romain Enjolras, president of the Young Farmers of Gard, Jérôme Despy, president of the Hérault Chamber of Agriculture, and Damien Honor, president of the Aude Wine Growers Union, spoke to growers and passerbys about difficulties facing the wine growing community in France. They discussed the need for a fair minimum price for wine, as well as emergency financial support and funds for uprooting and distillation, and for a promotional campaign to increase exports. Despy called for the release of at least 200 million euros from the European Crisis Reserve. Following on the heels of the protest, on November 17th, a Lidl supermarket in Béziers that had been selling bottles of Pays d'Oc wine for €1.35 this summer was vandalized. The Divi Pro bulk wine broker in neighboring Nissan Les Anzeroun, which is known to offer systematically low prices to supermarkets such as Lidl and Leclerc, was also vandalized. With all the unrest, it comes as a relief that on November 24th, France's Minister of Agriculture, Annie Genevard, announced a support plan for France's wine industry. The plan includes 130 million euros in national funding for uprooting, 5 million euros to relieve social security contributions, with another 10 million euros planned for next year, and the extension of structural loans. In addition, Genevard has called on the European Commissioner for Agriculture and Food to mobilize the European Crisis Reserve to secure funds for distillation. On to the acquisition of Domaine Sigalas in Greece. On November 11th, Kyriani, a wine estate with vineyard holdings in Naousa and Amindion, announced their acquisition of Domaine Sigalas on the island of Santorini. Kyriani first invested in Domaine Sigalas in 2009. Since 2020, they've taken over management of the winery and implemented an investment plan. They've now acquired the remainder of shares of the company from Greek shipowner Thanasis Martinos. At a time when Santorini's wine industry is being hit very hard by the climate crisis and reduced yields, this acquisition is incredibly promising for the future of Domaine Sigalas. Next, Vinarchy considers offloading 60 brands. If you remember back to May of this year, Australian Wine Holdco, owner of Accolade, bought all of Pernod Ricard's Australian, New Zealand, and Spanish wine interests and bundled them with Accolade to create Vinarchy, Australia's second largest wine company. A month after that, they closed cellar doors for Rolf Binder and Banrock Station and consolidated winemaking facilities for other brands. On November 25th, the Australian Financial Review reported that the business is considering culling about 60 brands, or 40% of its portfolio, in the next 2 years. Chief Executive Danny Saloni told AFR that the business will be focusing on its top 3 brands, Hardy's, Jacob's Creek, and Campo Viejo, as well as smaller format bottles, onto an early ice wine harvest in Germany. On November 11th, Wines of Germany announced an early ice wine harvest. Riesling, Sylvaner, and Sauvignon Gris have been harvested in Rheinhessen, Franken, Sachsen, the Pfalz, Hessische Bergstrasse, Württemberg, and the Mosel. Early reports suggest that 2025 will be an outstanding vintage for ice wine, as grapes were healthy and high in sugar. Finally, the oldest vine in the world. On November 10th, Guinness World Records reported its recognition of a 416-year-old wild grapevine in Tibet as the oldest living grapevine in the world. This vine replaces the old vine in Maribor, Slovenia, as the oldest living grapevine. That's all for this episode of the Wine News. I will be on a plane back to Oregon this coming Friday, so I won't see you again until the 12th. If you enjoy this newscast and you'd like to see it continue, please become a member of jancisrobinson.com. And if you have breaking news in your area, please email me at news@jancisrobinson.com. Thanks.